Texas made the playoff in 2023, and their fans will not be happy with anything less in 2024. Steve Sarkisian has his work cut out for him, and I'm chatting with Jake Crain of Crain and Company about how they can do that and what they may do this season. After my interview with Jake, I'll also talk about how Texas can set themselves apart this year and do something that truly nobody else can. All right, Texas made the playoff last year, played some pretty close games, though, against some just okay Big 12 teams. The SEC schedule is different. They've got Oklahoma like normal, but they add in UGA. We finally get to see Texas, Texas A&M, Michigan out of conference, and then there are no bye weeks in the SEC. I'm high on Texas, and they've done a good job in the portal, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But overall thoughts on Sark and what they need to do this year?
Well, you look at that schedule, and then, obviously Georgia and Oklahoma coming in the SEC, and then you add Michigan in the non-conference. And I know you're picking a good year, though, with Michigan. You'd much rather play them this next year after having lost all the guys that help them follow the yellow brick road, including Jim Harbaugh. Even though I thought Sharon Moore was the right hire, it was the easy choice there at Michigan. You look at Quinn Ewers coming back, and that's obviously huge. You get Isaiah Bond that leaves Alabama, that goes to Texas. Texas is going to have good personnel. They return a lot of the guys on that offensive line. That was a big reason they were able to have the success they had this year, including going to Tuscaloosa and being able to win that game and really keep Quinn Ewers clean the whole time. I think, in my honest opinion, Texas could be the best team that gets left out of the playoff. Because I think there's legitimately, especially if something were to happen to Quinn, God forbid, I'm looking at there could be 4 losses on that schedule. But with what they return, right, and we know the way that Sark is kind of that they've kind of gone from the 4 seasons lifestyle of it's kind of finesse out there to they are tough. Right? It looks like they've kind of flipped that script. The defense is going to be a little more experienced in certain places next year. They're kind of becoming a more complete team. But here's what I'll say, and I'll tell Oklahoma fans this too. And I know we have Florida State fans listening, ACC fans, but I think ACC fans get it a lot more than really Big 12 fans do when you talk about the SEC. The common misconception is that, all right, well, we're new into the SEC. Man, we just got to beat Georgia. Right, it's a one-off. We just got to beat Georgia. Man, if we can just beat Alabama, that's not the trick. I wish it was that easy. That's not how you get through the SEC. Obviously, you want to win those games, but where the SEC gets hard, and I think you're seeing this in college basketball too. There's not a week off. Like, yeah, you may play. All right, hey, we got Georgia. Right, 1-2 out of the last 3 national championships. Looks like a bunch of guys from Mordor running around out there. We realize how good they are. But then you got to play. Then you got to go to Kentucky. And then you've got to go to Ole Miss. And then, now I get Tennessee at home. It is the weekend, week out, fist fight where you are playing outside of Vanderbilt, who, by the way, did some things in the transfer portal that I think are pretty interesting. I don't think they're going to be as bad this coming up year as they were this past year. Remember, they went to a bowl game the year before this, but we really keep them in the SEC so we can point and say, listen, we care about school too. That's why they get that check. That's the only reason. That and, baseball. But when you look at having to go through the segments, the 3-4 game segments of a regular season schedule in the SEC, you can literally trip up in every single one of those weekends if you do not play well. That's why, again, it's just like anything, the teams that are not only able to survive or thrive are the ones that start to realize, hey, and you heard Nick Saban say this all the time, it's a faceless opponent. It doesn't matter if it's Georgia. It doesn't matter if it's Alcorn State. What we do matters. Yes, the game plan might change. Yes, the scouting report might change. Yes, we may add some things, change some personnels, right? Mix in some formations. But at the end of the day, it's about us going out there and playing as well as we possibly can. And if you make Monday the same, and Tuesday the same, and Wednesday the same, and Thursday the same, and Friday the same, most of the time, Saturday is going to be the same. Because, TJ, you can only get your team to play as well as at a high level of efficiency in all 3 phases 4, maybe 5 times a year. Maybe, if you're lucky. I mean, look at the NFL. The Niners were lucky to survive last week against the Packers. Those are the games you have to play bad and win, right? Go look at and every national champion, right? When's the last time a national champion went through a year and just wiped everybody that came out of the SEC? Auburn's a great example. 2010 Cam Newton. Yeah, they beat the hell out of some teams. Had to hit a game-winning walk-off field goal at Kentucky to win that game, to continue the undefeated season. No. So that is the gauntlet of going through it. And people can bat their eye at it, and they can laugh at it if they're not in it. But if you really are a rational and logical person, the way you look at it, that's the hardest part. Steve Sarkisian knows that. I'm interested to see when Kalen DeBoer is going to know that.
When you look at Texas in the transfer portal, smaller class than maybe Ole Miss and some others, but super impactful, a 5-star transfer, a few 4-star transfers, only a couple of guys that were 3s, Isaiah Bond from Alabama, Nyblack from Alabama, Trey Moore, 4-star edge that comes in. They get a safety from Clemson that's a 4. Thoughts on how they can get that thing to gel together? They certainly are dressing up the hamburger a little bit. Good solid core, but thoughts on what Texas has done in the portal?
Look, I think Sark is taking in the exact playbook that Nick Saban did once the transfer portal opened up. Like, go look. Like, again, it's very specific. You mentioned the volume. There's a lot less guys that Texas has gotten as opposed to Ole Miss. But all the guys that Texas have gotten have been at important positions where they were losing something, right? So, to go back to that analogy, they are legitimately plugging holes in the ship with the transfer portal, the same way that Bama would go get Eli Ricks, or that we'd see Bama go get one of the, a big-time offensive lineman when they needed to replace one or something like that. So, it's Sark, it's smart. He's going through it that way. And when you're at a place like Texas, you can do that pretty much every single year. So I think they have put themselves in a position where you're adding it, because you're losing a lot at wide receiver, right? You go back and look at what Texas has out there. They're losing a decent amount, but then you throw Isaiah Bond in there. You throw Nyblack in there. It just seems like every time that an Alabama player, a skill position player, would hop in the portal, it was like, Sark was just instantly on his phone. So it's smart. I think that's the best way to go about it. Now, unfortunately for them, they've got to go in the SEC this year, and I think there is going to be a couple learning curves when you look at that schedule. And I'm very interested to see how patient Texas fans are going to be, because regardless of the team you bring back, this is you are stepping into a new arena, right? You are now fighting the boss. You're not, this isn't beating the henchman up, or beating Robin Hood up, or not Robin. This is Batman. All right, so now we're going to find out.
You mentioned that they might be the best team that gets left out of the playoff. The expectation, though, is not going to be, hey, 13's okay, right? The expectation of, hey, we made the playoff last year, Michigan's losing a lot, Alabama's not having Saban, there's a lot of questions in the SEC too. The mindset there in Texas is going to be playoffs or bust. And so how do you kind of combat that if you're Steve Sarkisian, or you just buy in and go, or what does that look like?
Well, TJ, regardless, Texas fans think they're going to win the national championship every year.
Every year.
And you know what? You should.
Yeah.
You should. The minute the standard gets lower, and I said this about Auburn, right? The minute you start thinking, well, maybe we can't compete every year or be championship relevant every year, you are falling further and further behind. And in reality, a lot of teams are not going to be championship relevant every year. It's unbelievably hard, but it's the mindset. It's that standard that you're chasing. It is that arrogance that you need to have, that part of the ego that makes these guys successful, not only as players, but as coaches in the biggest stage, in the biggest moments. So the good news is if you're Steve Sarkisian, that it's always going to be that high, regardless of what the scenario is. So you have no control over that. The bad news is it's always going to be that high. It's always, regardless of the scenario, it's like Michigan this year or next year. You're going to have some fans who are going to be like, we better win the national championship again. And not realizing all that you've lost, but that's good. You want that. The minute that lowers, I always say the standard should never be lowered, but reality should always be accepted. And that's very, very hard for fan bases, because after all, at the end of the day, fan is short for fanatical, and Texas got as many of them as anybody right now.
Yeah, and they certainly don't measure reality well, which, again, most fan bases do not.
No.
Right?
No.
Jake, where can people follow you? Where can they find you? I love your show. You do a great job, but tell people where they can find all of this. And I appreciate you so much taking some time today.
Dude, of course, love your work too. And, you can find that anywhere. But yeah, look, if you watch your shows, we're on YouTube, Crain and Company, CRAIN and Company. We go live each weekday morning, 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. Central. It's 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. I'm not smart enough to know the other time zones, but I'm sure y'all can figure it out if you live in them. And if you can't catch us live, that's fine. It stays up there all day. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's spelled the same. We do have live calls, kind of Feinbaum-ish a little bit. We have great callers that call in. We have a live chat that's very, very active. That's a lot of fun as well. And we just had a movie come out called Lady Ballers. Everybody just Google the trailer. I think you'll get a kick out of it. But yeah, man, we have a good time. It's sports shows the way they kind of used to be, and talk a little bit of everything, including a lot of college football. So, but I appreciate you having me on, man. Like I said, I love what you're doing, and definitely down to come on. We got to get you on Crain and Company here soon.
I appreciate Jake Crain for hanging out today. Make sure that you check out Crain and Company here on YouTube today. All right. Texas has an opportunity to have the most insane insurance policy that anyone else has this season. And that's all resting on the shoulders of Archie Manning. How so? Well, he's sitting behind Quinn Ewers, but we'll likely explore the Longhorns QB situation in another video soon. But if you followed college football this year, you know how important a backup quarterback can be. Look at the way it even affects the perception of a team. You guys heard all the noise around Florida State, and you saw how they kept winning games with a backup in the third stringer, but that just wasn't enough. They didn't look the same, and so they were perceived differently, and that's what ultimately hurt them. Texas won't have that issue if something, God forbid, happens to yours. Now, they've got to play this right. Manning, though, seems to have a good head on his shoulders, and I think they'll be in a good spot if Sarkisian can keep both guys engaged and ready at a moment's notice. He's also got an opportunity to walk into one of the best situations in all of college football in 2025 if he bides his time. Now, there's a lot to be said about what will happen at that quarterback position, what will happen with Manning and Ewers now and in the future. But if Texas can keep that unit together, keep that room together, they are going to have one of the best 1-2 punches and best duos or backup or however you want to look at that in all of college football. And that can only help them this upcoming season. As we've seen, the committee lay down a precedent of how much having a starting caliber QB matters in this sport. What are your thoughts on this season, Longhorn fans? What are your thoughts if you're not a Longhorns fan as they start their very first season in the SEC? Let's talk about that down below in the comments. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Your Texas fans, non-Texas fans, SEC fans, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button down below. Join the family here at the College Football Addiction.